pride, shame, acceptance, and humility. Shame's hidden message, the moment your illusion finally shattered. Before I begin, I would like to remind you that this is a reflective essay, not a source of information. Its intention is not to criticize or judge anyone, but to provide ideas that help us change the way we see the world and generate well-being. The series Avatar, The Last Airbender is considered one of the best television series of all time, with captivating stories and profound messages that invite us to reflection. One of these valuable reflections is found in episode 19 of Book 2. Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame. It is a counterintuitive idea. Society considers pride and shame as opposites, however, this connection is closer to reality than we think. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins of Christianity and one of the 5 poisons that cloud the mind in Buddhism. Yet it is something that is celebrated every year in the main squares around the world. Do not misunderstand me, I understand and support the recognition of one's true self. But ironically, the name used to celebrate carries a negative connotation. I suppose the parade of acceptance does not sound as impactful, although it is probably the more correct term to describe the emotion of finding one's sexual preference or gender of one's authentic self. Pride, shame, acceptance, and humility are terms that have been heavily conditioned by society, exalting and diluting their meaning. The mission of this text is to redefine these terms and incorporate them into our daily lives in a way that offers value and well-being. To explain pride and acceptance, we need to understand 2 concepts that many people overlook: reality and the authentic self. Reality is what it is and is not bound to our ideas, perceptions, or beliefs. By its very nature, reality is unpleasant, uncomfortable, and complex, but, incredibly, it is also satisfying. The reason we find reality so undesirable is because we have adopted false ideas from the external world about how we should be. These are called conditionings, ways of acting and thinking that we learn without questioning them, and the imaginary, the fictional image of who we are that we construct to feel better. The imaginary and conditionings contrast reality with ideas of how things should be. Imagine that you believe you should be more successful. The imaginary establishes that false criterion, and conditionings dictate that if you are not, you are a failure. Every day you do not reach that idea of success, you experience a small pain. The authentic self is that person aligned with reality, free from conditionings and ideas of the imaginary, who resonates with reality. This resonance generates well-being. Now that we have the definitions, we can begin to understand the ideas that interest us. Let us begin with acceptance. It is a positive action that integrates one or more truths of our authentic self into our mental image of ourselves. Statements such as "I am introverted," "I am energetic," "I am curious," etc., are examples of this. The process of acceptance is constant and endless, because as human beings we are in continuous change, and what is true today may no longer be true tomorrow. In short, acceptance is aligning the idea of who I believe I am with who I really am. Acceptance is a satisfying process, but its intensity depends on the relevance of the discovery. Discovering that I have a vocation for health is certainly more impactful than discovering that I like strawberry ice cream. Here's something fascinating happens: the well-being we feel in acceptance is genuine and addictive. Our brain naturally wants to repeat that sensation. But there exists a subtle danger: when the pleasure of discovering who we are becomes too important, we begin to exaggerate what we discover, to make it bigger, more important, more definitive than it really is. This is where pride is born. The ideas that generate pleasure by exaggerating or lying about our own attributes are what we commonly know as pride. Pride leads us to feel a perverse pleasure and engenders a sense of exaltation, which is the most representative characteristic of this concept. It is important to note that the exaggerated image of pride does not necessarily have to be positive. The victim mentality is reinforced by the idea that we are incapable or in a situation of vulnerability. That false image of ourselves and the feeling that we deserve support and compassion can also be identified as pride. In this way, we can define pride as attachment to an image of ourselves that we protect at all costs, whether an image of superiority or victimization. The key characteristic is not whether it is positive or negative, but whether we defend that image against reality. The false idea that we are superior or inferior to others for one reason or another creates a disconnection from reality and from the people around us. This disconnection can be so severe that we stop perceiving ourselves as human and perceive ourselves as gods or subhumans, exempt from rules, laws, and consequences. That is why pride is considered a sin and a poison of the mind. Now, pride does not always reach those extremes. It operates on a spectrum and sometimes it can be imperceptible. However, its consequences remain the same: a disconnection from reality and from people. Imagine you construct the image that you are someone emotionally strong, pride. You feel good. But one day, faced with a loss, you cry. Suddenly, that act of crying directly contradicts your image. That violent clash between "I am strong" and "I just showed weakness" is shame. And shame hurts because it forces you to confront that the image you constructed was not real, the denial of the fictional idea we have created of ourselves. The confrontation with shame can have 2 consequences. The irrational reinforcement of the false idea, motivated by emotion, that shields itself against any attempt to undo it. To resume the process of acceptance, to readjust the image of ourselves with our authentic self. When the process of acceptance is applied to correct a false image or prevent it from forming, this is what we know as humility. Humility is the act of denying the false images of ourselves. It looks like this: when you were certain you were the most patient person in the group, and then you lose patience, humility is saying, I was wrong, I am not always patient. It is admitting aloud, or to yourself, that you are more complex and less perfect than you pretended to be. It is not self-flagellation, it is honesty. That is, humility is not making ourselves less, it is making ourselves more real. Now that we understand these concepts with greater clarity, we can understand that the feeling of well-being we have when we are honest with ourselves is not really pride, but acceptance and humility. This does not mean that society has to stop using the term pride to express a feeling of well-being. But I believe it is important that you understand what true pride implies and how to combat it. This leaves us questioning whether those things that cause us pride really are being patriotic, a good Samaritan, or someone who goes to church every Sunday. Are they signs of acceptance of ideas that bring us well-being, or are they sensations generated by the exaggerated image we have of ourselves regarding these ideas? The answer is personal to each one. But having a way to identify it is a useful tool. Self-observation is the most effective tool to combat pride and exercise humility. It is difficult because pride itself is tied to our identity. If you believe you are a victim or are superior, confronting that feels like dying. That is why many people prefer the pain of chronic shame, because at least it confirms their identity. But there is a higher cost: living disconnected from reality, alienated from people, gradually more alone. That isolation is true dehumanization. The path toward the authentic self begins when we stop defending the false images of ourselves. Yes, shame will come, it is inevitable. Humility transforms that shame from an enemy into a teacher. Each time you catch yourself exaggerating who you are or lying about yourself, you have an opportunity: you can reinforce the illusion, or you can tell the truth. The power lies in that choice. Remember, the power is yours.